4:30, and we are here, Tommytown Television. This is our fourth Thursday in a row we've broadcast to talk to you about COVID-19. What I try to do is I start with some updates over the past week, things that the state and the town have done, procedures that are changing, laws that are changing. And then we go right to our guest, who this week is Chief Sullivan, Brookline's fire chief. And he's going to tell us what's going on with the fire department, how they've evolved in COVID-19, and what they're doing to help. But before I start with that, I want to tell you about this jacket, for starters, because it's really hot wearing it. This is the jacket. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit, maybe stand up. This jacket is from Linden, North Carolina, West Area Fire. It's a volunteer fire service in rural North Carolina, not too far from Fayetteville. And this was my father-in-law's jacket. He was the deputy chief there. He passed away about 15 months ago after a career in the Air Force. He did a second career as a volunteer firefighter. And I'm just, I'm proud to have known him. I'm proud of all the work he did for his communities throughout his lifetime and for his country. And so I have this jacket. I don't wear it outside. I wear my orange ones, but I wanted to show it off today. And I'm going to take it off because it is really, really hot. Some updates on town and state since last week. The governor signed a bill the House and Senate passed that made a number of technical changes for local government, including town meeting and the ability for the town to bond and so forth. That was important stuff. It's not especially exciting. More exciting is the governor signed the bill that allows restaurants to sell beer and wine, both takeout and delivery. So here's how that works. Of course, you got to have a valid ID. Of course, you cannot be consuming that beer or wine on the drive or walk home. But you can get up to 16 12-ounce cans of beer or up to 2 3/4-liter bottles of wine if you are doing takeout or delivery. And so I encourage you to do that if that's the kind of evening or heck lunch you'd like to have. There aren't a whole lot of other updates. Actually, I take that back. On the town side, there are quite a number of updates. The town released a document yesterday outlining a number of changes that are really important, and I want to try to capture them all. I'll do the best I can. The town was unable at this time to cease all non-COVID-19 construction, but the select board did send a letter to the governor requesting that authority. What the town has done is the following. Number one, all restaurant personnel must be wearing eye, face, and hand protective gear all the time. And that's really important. Furthermore, the delivered food must be completely sealed, and the delivery person must also be wearing all of that protective gear. You are encouraged, you are not technically required, but you are encouraged very much so to use credit card or debit card over the phone so that you don't even have to do a currency exchange with the restaurant. And that includes tipping the driver. Please do that. So that's an update on restaurants. Additionally, the Transportation Board just approved widening the sidewalks on a temporary basis in the following areas: the length of Harvard Street, the length of Longwood Ave and Brookline Ave in Brookline, and Beacon Street right around Coolidge Corner. And the idea was that in the case of Harvard Street, there are several grocers and several pharmacies on the street. The sidewalks are narrow. We want people to keep that physical distance. That's so important. And when you're outside, please do wear the mask, as the CDC is now encouraging. For Brookline Ave and Longwood Ave, those are major pedestrian employee routes to the Longwood medical area. And so we want to keep our doctors, nurses, hospital personnel safe. And that means they need that physical distancing as well. And then on Beacon Street, right on Coolidge Corner, of course, it's congested. You've got Trader Joe's and a CVS. There's a couple of other food shops. And so we want people to have that physical distancing. So the town has done that as well. Finally, Dr. Swanee Jett from the health department has stated that there will be no evictions during COVID-19. That's both residential and commercial, and that real estate agents, landlords, and so forth are not allowed to enter residential units for non-emergency purposes, and that includes no showing apartments that are occupied. So these are some of the changes that have happened just this week. Of course, the list is tremendously long. I do want to remind folks that unemployment benefits are taking a long time to process. So you want to go ahead and apply if you're eligible right away. That includes the possibility for 1099 and other independent type employees. SBA loans, small business loans are available, but similarly, as you can imagine, there's tremendous demand. So please go ahead and apply. And if you do need help of any kind, call me or email me. This is me, 617-872-8921 is my cell phone. Call me. Tommy.vitolo@mahouse.gov. Email me. We've been very busy with both landlord-tenant issues and with unemployment issues. We're going to keep working on it. We found we're getting pretty good at navigating state government agencies and are really happy to help. And so without further ado, I want to introduce Chief Sullivan. He is new to being Brookline's chief, but not new to fighting fires. And Chief, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
You're welcome, Tommy. Thanks for having me. Actually, it's I just celebrated my second year of service here to the town of Brookline, so not quite as new as I used to be, but still new in the grand scheme of things.
You look like a spring chicken to me, Chief.
Thank you.
I want to actually talk about how the fire department more generally has adapted to COVID-19. You make all kinds of calls, not just for fires. If you could kind of describe the different kinds of calls you respond to and maybe what you're doing differently now to increase protection both of firefighters and of everyone else.
Sure. When this all started to, burgeon itself nationally back at the end of February and early March, the COVID-19 task force for the town got together and we started to make plans, and then individually each of the departments was making plans and were generating the workflows that we would need to be able to maintain services, but at the same time protect our members. So a number of different initiatives were put together in the first few days of the pandemic coming east towards Massachusetts when the numbers were still low. And at that stage, it was very much just planning. We developed different tiered levels of response changes that we would need to make. Obviously, as a public health crisis, the most relevant place where the fire department would come into the mix would be on our medical calls or first responder calls for service to the residents of the town of Brookline. We are not the primary EMS provider in town. Fallon Ambulance Service is the contracted ambulance service with the town. So the paramedics that respond from our fire stations, 2 of our fire stations house the ambulance service as well in the station on Washington Street near Washington Square, and then at Station 4 up on Chestnut Hill on Boylston Street. And so we work very close together with those folks from Fallon and have for many, many years. And also, of course, the police are also first responders. So one of the things we did was sat down very early on with the Fallon Ambulance Service, their supervisory staff, and tried to develop a plan of action for how we would go about responding to the increased call volume that would come from this type of public health crisis moving in that exponential way that we're seeing it now. It's ironic that the number of overall calls for medical calls has actually dropped over the course of these last several weeks. People understand that the hospitals are places where the big impact is happening. And so a lot of the calls that would normally go to the hospitals that would be of a lesser priority, a lot of folks are not doing that. So our first responder calls are down, but What we've done, of course, is we've shored up our supplies of personal protective equipment, or PPE, that you're hearing so much about in the news, and we're very much trying to limit our exposure, and by doing so, not only keep our firefighters and our medical personnel safe, but also limit the amount of PPE that needs to be used on any one call. We put in operational plans whereby we're all still responding to first responder calls, but our ambulance service is very attentive, and as long as there's not a delay in the ambulance getting on scene, or what we would call a priority one call, heart attack, somebody not breathing, the fire department and the police department are staging for the ambulance service to get to the scene. We're pretty much arriving the same time as they do most times, but that way we're not putting firefighters and police officers in that very limited number of PPE that we have, just to go in and make an assessment. As long as the person has been talking to the dispatch and their family members that they're breathing and that they're conscious and alert, we're basically staging for the ambulance so that they can then make the entry and just use that one set of PPE, and limit that amount of use that's so vitally important to keep us up and rolling over the course of this next several weeks to month or 2 months, however long this is going to go. So that was one of the first measures that we took. We obviously made a number of different plans, contingency plans, for if the call volume really started to spike in an exponential level, and we were getting beyond the resources of our ambulance service, what contingencies they would make in order to backfill ambulances into the town, and then how would the fire department in turn respond along with the police department to cover that gap. So far, we have not had to do that. Fallon Ambulance has committed several basic life support BLS ambulances to the area to support the ALS, advanced life support units, that they have. So a lot of the patients that are being transported are being seen on scene by the paramedics, and then transported by the basic life support ambulances to the hospital, so that the ALS units can stay in town and they don't have to leave the town. So it's very much a cooperative effort between police, fire, and EMS. We're the first line of defense in this. People are home. They're very much heeding the advice of all of the medical community and all the public health community, and staying at home, and not utilizing the emergency room unless it absolutely has to be used. And so we're very fortunate in the town of Brookline to be very close to such world-class medical facilities, and so our turnaround time is very short as well. So we're able to get these folks to the hospital, and then get the ambulances and the personnel back in town very quickly. So all of those things are in play right now, and that's just from the EMS response side of things. Then there's a second half to the equation, and that is our firefighters. And and I also wear the hat as the emergency management coordinator, emergency management director for the town. So half of my time has been spent running the emergency management operations center down at Hammond Street for the town's response, and then half of it for the fire department response. But as far as the fire department goes, I think most people know by now that early on in the event here, we had a firefighter who did test positive. Unknown exactly at this point where the source of that infection came from, whether it was a job related or whether it was off the job. But we're treating it in the aspect that it was part of the job duties, and that firefighter was then obviously put into isolation by the public health department, and a number of our firefighters that were working with that firefighter were then subsequently quarantined for 14 days. It just so happens that this firefighter has a brother that they live together, they share an apartment, and that brother is a firefighter. That firefighter in turn also got a positive test and had worked with other firefighters. And so it was kind of a snowball effect.
Yeah.
In the long run, the fire department had 5 so far members that were tested positive. 3 of them we can directly trace, and 2 of them we don't know exactly what the origin was, but at a given point about a week ago, we had upwards of 44 of our other firefighters, it would be 40, including the other 4, that were quarantined as a result of their exposures. Thankfully, we had all of those firefighters who were in quarantine tested, and none of them came back positive from their exposure. So they did their 14-day quarantines, and as of yesterday, all of those firefighters were released back to work by the public health department and our medical advisors. So other than those firefighters who are still out with positive tests, who are recuperating, the vast majority of our firefighters are back to work as of yesterday.
That's great, and it's been reported publicly. So I will tell folks it was the Babcock Street Station, and the firefighters from the Babcock Street Station that were immediately involved. I want to ask you if you could describe in just for just a few minutes about the so-called new fire stations. I understand there are 2 sort of new stations. Tell us what I mean by that and what's going on there.
Well, let me give you the lead up to why we did that. So the Babcock Street Station was where the first reported case was. And that station, along with the station at Brookline Village, happens to house 2 different fire companies, 1 engine and 1 ladder. So there are 2 sets of firefighters that work in those 2 stations. Obviously, when one person then becomes ill and is an exposure risk, it then exponentially exposes, upwards of 8, 10, 11 other firefighters. So one of the things that we realized early on, and this is a learning curve for all of us, is that, these fire stations, they're close quarters. Their firefighters are living together for 24 hours at a time. That by itself constitutes a close contact by the definition from the CDC. Having that close proximity to someone for that long period of time. So if we keep those firefighters all together in one station like that, one firefighter could then pose an exposure risk and quarantine upwards of 8, 9, 10, 11 other firefighters, depending on the complement of folks at work that day. So the concept of doing the satellite stations was then explored in order to separate those 2 companies, so that if one firefighter then did become an exposure problem, then the amount of exposure, secondary exposures or primary exposures to other firefighters would be cut in half. So we explored the different public buildings within the districts of where those 2 stations are, and we're able to secure a location at the main public library. And thanks to our head librarian, Sarah Slyman, and the library board, they were willing to open up their doors to us to allow us to take over some of the rooms on the lower level, which have a connecting corridor and door to the garage area, so we can store our fire truck out of the elements in the garage there, and put our firefighters up at the library. The other location that was identified was the new Coolidge Corner School. Also has a large loading dock with a covering over off of Stedman Street, and as a secure door that we can store the fire truck in there. And the school department, along with Acting Superintendent Loomis and Mary Ellen Norman from the school department, were very instrumental in helping us to get secure some space at the school over there to keep the company in the district, so that our responses would still be very, very low time responses, and we wouldn't have to lose any of our operational capabilities. But at the same time, separating those firefighters so that their risk is then reduced.
Now, the Coolidge Corner School, Stedman Street garage is on a one-way street. Does that cause any problems for you?
Not necessarily. I mean, it's a little bit of a longer turnaround to just go up to Harvard and then come back down Babcock if we had to go in the opposite direction. But it's still a workable solution given that we're literally 60 or 70 yards from the other station, just
Yeah.
through the backyard of the other folks on Babcock Street to the back of that station. So we don't lose a lot of response time, and it would only be for those calls that were going in the opposite direction that would have any impact, but it would be minimal. So it's a fair it's fairly insignificant in the grand scheme of things as far as the time goes.
Good, good. Now I've gotten a question from a viewer,
Sure.
and the question is, has the suspension of the civil service exam altered any hiring plans for the fire department?
At this point, it doesn't affect us right now because luckily for us, we are very our staffing is very high right now. We only have one or two vacancies. I think it's two as of this moment. Two vacancies in the fire department, and so we would not be looking to put a class of firefighters on until we reached a higher number in this 6, 7, 8 vacancies. It just doesn't make economic sense for us to try to run a drill school for just one or two folks. So it does not significantly impact Brookline. It would impact other communities, but I assume I haven't heard yet from HRD at the state level that the current list will likely extend beyond its expiration. And then the folks who are signed up to take the next test would in turn be given an opportunity at some time at a later point, and then they would just pick up from there. That's my assumption.
That sounds likely to me. You mentioned at least in passing, the training center, which just opened recently. The town built. Can you?
Sure.
It's not so COVID related, but I think it's interesting and important. Can you tell us where it is, what it is, and what its significant is, not just for Brookline but for the region?
Yeah, sure. We were really, really fortunate here in Brookline to have the voter support a $4.2 million new training center for our firefighters, but also for the region. Brookline has been in kind of an unusual circumstance here for as long as anybody can remember. We've always done our own academy classes here in Brookline, but we've also opened that up to a number of our neighboring communities, and there's probably not a community within 2 or 3 towns from here that hasn't taken advantage of having a Brookline Fire School training school over the course of the last 50 or 60 years. So we were able to build a new training center on the same footprint as it was before, behind Station 6 on Hammond Street, and we have a brand new burn building. So that building is a prefabricated building where we can light fires and simulate responses into that building and train our firefighters in live fire training. And then correspondingly to that, we have a new training and maintenance facility that was built that has a state-of-the-art classroom and a new maintenance facility for our trucks to be serviced in-house and get a lot of the work done in-house and save the taxpayers a lot of money. That facility is intended to, as you mentioned, Tom, to be a regional facility for other trainings, so that we can offer dates and times for other fire departments to come in and use the burn building and use the resource as well. So we're very excited about getting that off the ground. Unfortunately, we're in kind of a holding pattern right now with everything that's going on. We're using our training division as our logistics section for the fire department. They're coordinating the training for our firefighters on all of this COVID response, donning and doffing of the PPE and best practices, as well as they have taken control of all of the stock of our PPE and inventory, and are doing a fantastic job down there, making sure that our firefighters are well trained and well stocked in what they need.
Now, um, firefighters in a professional capacity do two things that the rest of us are doing a little more of, which is stay cooped up in one place with a couple of people for inordinate amounts of time, and also just have a higher level of stress, right, in sort of day-to-day operations. Can you give us folks at home some tips on either, how to get along with folks living in these close quarters, or how to manage some of this stress?
Yeah, it's funny that you should mention that. The the idea of uh, 6, 7, 8, 10, 12 folks living together for 24 hours in a fire station and sharing meals and literally sleeping side by side in the bunk room and so on. It has two, it's a double-edged sword. It creates a great deal of camaraderie, and there's a lot of fellowship that goes on at the station, and it gives us an opportunity also to get to understand people, and different people from different walks of life, as well as different personality types. And so I can't say that we're not without our challenges at times, like any family, but for the most part, I think the basic necessity of knowing that when the bell rings, that person that's next to you is literally the person who could be saving your life, has it creates this higher sort of connection between the firefighters that you might not get in some other kind of social or fraternal setting. It's just a matter of understanding that people deal with stress differently, and people's personalities are just they are what they are, and accepting folks for their strengths and their weaknesses. And I guess for us, knowing that at the end of the 24-hour shift, it's going to be over, so you can tolerate it a little more. If you're at home and you're home with your family or whoever for 2 weeks, 3 weeks at a time, the best advice I can give you is just to ask ask for time for yourself, and move into a different area if you find yourself and your stress level getting higher, and go and do what makes you happy. I listen to music, and I just I can't watch the news too much anymore. I just put on Netflix and try to find something that doesn't have anything to do with COVID-19 for a few minutes, so I can take my mind off of it. And reading or whatever your outlet is, I would say that's the way to go to try to deal with the stress at this point. Certainly, the folks that you live with are the people that you love the most, and so be mindful of that, and remember what we're doing this for. We're doing it for each other. Every one of us is staying home for everybody else. It's not so much that we're trying to do two things here. We're trying to keep ourselves from becoming infected by this virus, but then the even greater good, the bigger showing of empathy and support to the community is so that you're not out there potentially infecting someone else. So that's a great message for everybody. Stay at home for everyone.
And Chief, we've got about 1 minute left. Can you quickly, so long as we've got folks' attention, throw out some fire safety advice for folks at home? What can they do to help prevent having to call you in the first place?
Yeah, so I mean, as far as the fire side goes, make sure your smoke detectors are working. If you're using, any open flame devices, just be careful. Make sure that you're using them correctly. If you're using candles or whatever, please just make sure that there's no combustibles around them, and use common sense. And as far as medical calls go, we're here 24/7 for you. If you're having difficulty and it's that time, please do not hesitate to call 911 and let us come and help you. I know people are somewhat hesitant now, but in the long run, The medical professionals will evaluate, and we'll help you to make the best decision that we can.
Chief, thank you. I want to let you know I received several emails that didn't include questions, but folks were just saying, we're so proud to have the Brookline firefighters working in our community. We're so thankful that each and every day on COVID-19 issues and all those other issues that the men and women of the Brookline Fire Department are there for us. And we're so grateful. So thank you for your work. Thank you for what you're doing. I want to remind the viewers, we're here every Thursday at 2:30 on Brookline Interactive. And we have an election coming up June 9th. It's not going to be in May, it's June 9th. And so we want to see you out there voting in our local elections. It's so important. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Brookline Interactive. This is State Representative Tommy Vitolo signing off.